Good morning and welcome to the Leadership Insurance Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Caribou, who is both a partner at Semper Virens Venture Capital and known to me and probably many others as well, is a chairman and co-founder of Insurtech Connect, which, if isn't the biggest Insurtech conference, is known to be the most raucous. I don't know if that's the tagline you want, but
and it is the biggest, Alex, by a good margin. So I got to throw that in there for you. But I appreciate the most raucous. That's really good too.
I was pretty confident it was, but didn't want to get upset any other events out there. But look, before we dive in, always better to throw it over to my guest, and if you'd be so kind enough to introduce yourself and what it is you do, although fairly probably as it says on the tin, I would imagine, but always better to get your take on it.
Well, thanks for having me here, Alex. Really appreciate the time to talk with you. So for my part, I do get to wear a few different hats professionally. So partner at Semper Virens Venture Capital, boutique venture capital firm, very focused actually on really any startup that is selling to or through the employer, has some connectivity into the employer channel, some relationship there, and talk more about why we think we deserve to exist and all that. I'm also, as you say, chairman, co-founder of Insurtech Connect, the most raucous Insurtech conference in the world, and actually also helped co-found a few other industry tech conferences, one in the real estate tech arena, one in the sort of HR tech future work arena. So I've got this weird habit of helping to launch those kinds of conferences. And then, I try to do a little bit of writing and speaking and podcasts and basically make a nuisance of myself wherever possible. So that's really my job.
Sounds like me. I've got so many people that I think I just do podcasts and events, and I'm like, no, the day job is definitely recruitment. That's what pays the bills. But good to make some noise, put some energy out there, as you said just before we hit record. So I think that's important. Talk to me about, before we dive in, your involvement in the insurance and insurtech industry goes back to its kind of more nascent stages. How did you get involved in it? What drew you into it? Because you didn't come from a traditional insurance background. It was more banking, wasn't it? And then moved into insurance.
That's exactly right. I mean, I'm sort of an accidental insurtech guy. So I cut my teeth at my first and only real job. Was a decade at Capital One, really back in its heyday, right? So 96 to 2006, it was going through hyper growth. I was like employee number 1,200 when I started. Employee number 20,000, left, kind of thing. And but really an amazing place to learn how to use data in a business strategy, which obviously applies to every risk business. So decade there, then actually co-founded a boutique venture capital firm prior to my getting involved with Semper Virens, a fund called QED Investors. Myself and a couple other former Cap One execs came together to create that. And again, it's sort of, we saw the applicability of the power of data and really sort of using the data in the business strategy in the right way to be impactful for a whole nother generation of startups. Not just in banking and fintech, we did some ad tech, we did a little HR tech actually. We also did a couple InsurTech deals before InsurTech was a thing. So like I said, we started doing fintech before it was a thing, and then we started to do InsurTech before it was a thing. So we like to be, on the leading edge there. But people knew of us in terms of getting involved on the startups that had data as a core part of their strategy. So we would start to see these insurance-related deals, particularly around sort of with a data component. And even though we didn't necessarily know the industry that well, we did have some sense of some thesis around the power of the data there. I like to say the doing banking, right, does not mean that you know a darn thing about insurance, right? You do not have the answers, and I would never pretend to have the answers in insurance based on 10 or 15 years in the banking world, no matter how, even if in an innovative corner of the banking world. But it does mean you largely know the right questions to ask. Right? So the questions in banking, and if you want to be doing something interesting as a startup in banking, are largely the same questions as in insurance. Often different answers, but usually the key thing is knowing what questions to ask, not having the answers ready-made. So we knew a few of the right questions to ask when we would see some Insurtech startups. We actually, I led an investment in a telematics company back in 2011, right? Which is actually a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And we actually had an exit in the telematics company. In telematics space, we had an exit in 2015. Like,
wow.
That's like ancient history now.
Yeah.
And it had real revenue and stuff like that. It was amazing.
How old-fashioned.
It was great. We were in a workers' comp related company as well. And so we started to, I'd say dabble, right? Learn a bit about the industry specifics by doing that. And then, 2015, 2016, I say it kind of smelled like something interesting was about to happen in the Insurtech category. And so I said, look, I'll focus on Insurtech for a while here, see if there's something really meaningful to do. And that's what actually led to Insurtech Connect is like, well, I should go to an industry conference. Oh, I can't find one. Oh, well, I need one. Well, maybe I should create it. Luckily got connected with a guy who knew actually what he was doing. But that ended up being the genesis of it. So yeah, it's sort of accidental into the insurance industry, but it's such an important industry, right?
Yeah.
And so much opportunity that I kind of fell in love with, getting deep into the Insurtech space.
What were the sort of winds of change? I mean, you sort of said it smelt like something was going to happen. I think I see. I kind of felt that as well because I obviously worked in the insurance industry for such a long time, and now our business is purely Insurtech. But I was a bit late to the party from that point of view. Because I suppose from a recruitment business, you have to come a bit later because you have to get that scale. From an investment situation, you want to be in earlier because you want to sort of get that value. What were the things that led you to think that? Was it data driven? Was it just sort of relationship led and your network? I'm intrigued to see sort of like what's the tipping point for you to kind of
so again,
focus
sort
in.
of dial the clock back about 6-7 years, right? And asking at that time, why now? Right, is really what you're doing. And I'd say there were a couple factors going on all at once. One, the insurance industry was kind of a laggard to adopt and embrace a bunch of technologies, like base level technologies that were reaching some stage of maturity. Even the banking world, got meaningful change from the internet. Even the internet was not really a big enough deal to like change the insurance industry that much, which is an amazing thing to say. Like the internet's a pretty big deal. But you start to layer on the internet, the maturity of the cloud infrastructure, the penetration of the smartphones, right? The maturity of satellite data, right? Even machine learning was just beginning to actually become like really functional for image and language processing. You had these pent up technologies that there was so much water behind the dam, right, that even the insurance industry could not sort of hold it back. There was just too much value in starting to deploy these base layers of maturing technology into the industry that either it made total sense for some B2B startups to launch that would help the incumbents to take advantage of those technologies, or for some B2C type companies to emerge to leverage those technologies from scratch to compete against the incumbents. But either way, there's just clearly so much value in that technology. That's sort of core part one. Then the other thing is you had this influx of both quality entrepreneurs and kind of the VC community, right? Many of whom, like us at QED, had some really nice success in the fintech arena, looking for, well, where else do we expand into? What other sectors are interesting? And Insurtech, again, the answers may not be the same, but the questions are often quite similar between what's going to drive success in fintech and what's going to drive success in Insurtech. So you had a nice influx of very high quality tier one, often fintech driven VCs looking at the sector at the same time. So you sort of need all those things. You need the deep economic rationale. You need the quality of entrepreneurs coming in. And for most industries, you need at least some venture capital coming in to fund the initial development and growth. And all those things were coming together in 2015, 2016.
Sure, sure. Interesting. I'm intrigued about this kind of idea of about I can't go to an event, so I start an events business. I suppose part of that kind of leans into. I'm surprised you didn't jump up and build build a big Insurtech. I suppose you didn't go with that first or venture first. You were like looking for investments in the space. Did you look at running with your own gig? Were there propositions that came to you and you want to get more involved? Did you purely want to take an investor's view of it? Because there's something about that mentality of I can't go to an event, I'm going to launch a massive event, because it's a pretty big event. It's not like, oh, I might invite a few people for dinner. It's like, let's put it on in Vegas. I think it's going to be 8,000 people this year or something crazy. So, and I'm sure it didn't start that way, but there's an intriguing mentality there.
Well, look, see a need, fill a need, right? I think there is a lot of power in a mindset of problem solving, right? Like, oh, here's a problem. No one else seems to be fixing it. I feel like I can, right? Or at least maybe I can. So let me give it a try. As opposed to, hey, it would be cool to be an entrepreneur in the Insurtech space. I think that there's plenty of stuff that's going to get funded. So maybe I'll go try to find some idea to pursue. Like, that can work too. Like, that's actually a sort of more top down, sometimes top down strategy, McKinsey type of, oh, here's where you want to be trying to build new stuff. That can make sense too. But this was for me just more organic. I was perfectly happy to be, doing VC, and actually quite excited to be trying to invest in the next generation of Insurtechs. It was just really more, I'm not trying to change my career. I'm trying to just like solve this problem. And then, not a fool. It was obvious that if I helped create the leading industry conference, that'd be a pretty nice hilltop to sit on and see what's going on, have interesting conversations with the people. I admittedly became quite surprised, and maybe in hindsight, I shouldn't have been, quite surprised that like industry executives much more interested in talking to me and hearing what I had to say once I was an event planner rather than a VC. It's like, as a VC, my job is to like look around corners. It's to, sort of see all the key trends and all that, and actually like put my money where my mouth is. I would have thought that would be like, okay, that's an interesting role for someone to talk to if they're in the industry and want to get a sense. No, not really all that exciting. Oh, you're an event planner. All right. I want to hear what you have to say about what's going on. I'm a little facetious in how I describe that, but like, it opened way more doors, quite honestly, to be, one of the faces with this guy wearing the hat up on the stage, and, having the, having the, it shows up pretty well to have the foresight of like, oh, okay, this guy, had some conviction around the arena and did something about it to help bring the industry together. So, I'm a beneficiary there.
There's an interesting resonance with the podcast, actually, because I think, I went to ITI twice. I mean, the European and was in New York, and it's kind of a split between people that wanted to sort of talk to me about recruitment issues, and then other people that wanted to talk to me just about the podcast. And it definitely opens more doors that way. But I think there's something about putting on events, putting on podcasts. All right, events podcasts can be profitable when you can get sponsorship. Events are things that you can make money from. But there's almost a neutrality to that, isn't there? There's a sort of part of the community you're contributing without profiting is almost the sort of mentality of that. And I think when you put the venture hat on, it's essentially always about profit ultimately. And I think the recruitment hat the same. And so I do kind of understand that, because that's certainly been my perspective. And I think when you get in at the ground level, there is quite a, it's kind of there's such a sort of genuine honesty about the sort of the enthusiasm around Insurtech, which I think has surprised me. There's a sort of real excitement about it. Has that surprised you, sort of how much people are invested emotionally in the kind of the ecosystem of Insurtech?
So I guess I have the advantage of having been doing venture capital for now 14, close to 15 years. Right? Almost by definition, entrepreneurs are literally perhaps insanely enthusiastic with what they're doing, regardless of the sector, right? So, but it's fintech, ad tech, HR tech, which I see a lot these days, healthcare tech, where actually it's very easy to be enthusiastic when you're doing things as an entrepreneur in healthcare tech, because you can be literally trying to help cure cancer. Like, it's not
Sure. Yeah.
it's not the metaphor. But the same is true in InsurTech. And I think insurance is, in my view, so close to being a pure good as a product. And I commented on this a couple of years ago, actually at ITC, talking on stage. Like, yes, I spent lots of time in banking, right? Fine, good training, and useful products. But think about people getting onto a debt treadmill, or they're up to their eyeballs in debt, right? And they can't get out. Too much of a good thing, right, becomes a bad thing, right? I love my hamburger, but if I eat too many hamburgers every day for too many days in a row, there's a problem. Insurance, you never hear someone say, gee, I was up to my eyeballs in insurance. I had so much. I'm on such an insurance treadmill. I just, can't get enough insurance here. Like,
Sure.
Insurance is a good thing. And if anything, it's people aren't getting enough, right? Not that they're buying too much. Now, as an industry, I think there's things that can do better. I think that the conflict moment around claims, right, sometimes goes really well and sometimes does not. So I think there's lots of user experience, customer experience that can be improved upon. But at a deep level, this is a good product. Like, it's a fundamental good. And I think that I get some energy out of that. On top of just the chance to work with great entrepreneurs who are excited to do stuff.
I think that's such an important thing to acknowledge, and I think that we've seen that in the let's be honest, market correction of some of the kind of investments that have been happening over the last kind of a few years, because this ridiculous notion that insurance is broken. It was so oversimplified as a kind of proposition. It was always going to fail. Like, no, insurance is brilliant. Like insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now, because it would be like Amazon's tagline being "retail is broken." I was like, well, retail wasn't broken. You could happily go and buy anything you liked, but you bought it in a different way. You had a different customer experience, and Amazon have just nailed in what that new customer experience is, and they've reimagined it in a way that probably we wouldn't have imagined ourselves. So, and I hate using Amazon example. I'd love to pick something more esoteric and interesting, but there's a reason it's ubiquitous. It's because they've kind of nailed it in terms of customer experience from retail perspective. So, but I think it's such an important point to talk about. You touched on it there. You're talking about claims. I'm slightly obsessed with claims at the moment. What kind of macro trends are interesting you in InsurTech right now? Is there a kind of particular theme of things that you are interested in?
Yeah, it is sort of my job to be figuring out what I at least believe is coming around the corner, right?
Exactly.
What's going to be important. That doesn't mean I'm always right, but that's definitely my job to at least, be right sometimes.
Yep.
And a little ahead of the curve. So, I think there's a few things that I'm sort of keen on, my sort of themes for 2022. One is actually no code, maybe low code platforms.
Yeah.
I think there's some real value there, both sort of obvious speed and cost efficiency, maybe some that are more subtle around getting the product manager closer to the metal, so to speak, and not having the sort of garble that happens when product manager hands off a user spec to a developer who then writes stuff. So I'm actually quite excited about that. Actually led an investment a couple months ago in a no-code platform, a company called CoverGo. So putting my money where my mouth is on that one.
Yeah, sure.
I'm also sort of broadly, I think we're on the verge of an InsurTech 2.0 in terms of the customer facing ones. There's been the first wave, very capable entrepreneurs, but really trying to bite off a very big chunk. If you've got Hippo trying to, do all of homeowners insurance in 50 states, and Lemonade, I mean, my gosh, trying to do every category of insurance in, half the world. Those are big chunks to chew off. And you've seen some in auto insurance and so on. I think that there's this next wave of entrepreneur emerging who's actually focused on starting with a specialty, starting with a much narrower niche, and then let's deliver really well against that, right? In terms of go-to market, distribution, product, underwriting, claims process. And then once we've nailed it on a niche, then that gives us sort of permission to either sell other stuff to that same niche or to go into some adjacencies, right? In terms of segment and solve for that. Right? And I think that is actually, especially where, the sort of capital markets have shifted their mindset from grow at any cost to some balance between we want to see growth and we want to see great unit economics and efficiency.
Yeah.
I think that this specialty, the narrow niche approach, lends itself, can still grow, but lends itself to a little bit less competitive dynamics, right? And therefore potentially better unit economics when you start to solve for it. The flip side of that is you've got to expand other adjacencies in order to build a multi-billion-dollar company. So it's that is where the trade-off hits.
Yeah, and I was thinking what has always struck me about venture capital-backed businesses is the balance between taking on enough money, but not so much investment that actually you're under pressure to grow at all costs, and therefore you start in a niche where you have a unique proposition. And then to sort of get from under the weight of the size of the investment that you've taken on, you have to expand into areas where you potentially don't have a unique proposition. You're competing. The great example might be something like, a lot of people have gone into the sort of delivery driver space, or the kind of like Uber type generation in auto. And then they've had to spin out auto into a much broader auto proposition, where they don't necessarily actually have any different data points to a traditional insurer, or there's no unit economics to back it up. So I think is a real balancing act. And I think where people have been overzealous has been the speed, the speed of, we want to get there. Everyone wants to get there, and everyone wants to get there quickly. But maybe there's kind of been, there's a market correction on both the investor class, but also the kind of the entrepreneur class. There's been a little bit of we want to get there too quickly.
Yeah, and if an entrepreneur takes on too much capital for the stage of the business, they will architect the business to use the capital, right? Invariably.
Yes, exactly.
And so and they will architect it, right, to overconsume capital, or to build a higher cost structure than the underlying business or market actually warrants. And when they do that, right, as soon as it's not even that the music stops, it's just that the tempo slows down for the music that's playing, right? That's where they discover, oh, gee, we architected our business to be for a world where capital is abundant and cheap, right? And that's actually a sort of artificial and arguably unhealthy way to architect your business, right? Moderation. There's also, look, you can sometimes bootstrap a business, right? Actually, in insurance, you kind of see that sometimes more on the broker side of business models. So there's no absolutes here, but there are definitely like, if you're going to, take on that much capital, watch out, because the typical stumbling block is you actually spend it.
Yeah, because I've got huge empathy for what's going on at the moment, because we've seen a bit of a restriction, particularly at those earlier stage businesses. And I was talking to someone who was being quite disparaging, and had said people had sort of started business with a view to constantly being raising rounds and growing, and and I had to counter that by saying, but that's the environment we were in. We were in an environment where that was a perfectly legitimate way to grow a business. But the problem with that is that when that flow of capital slows even slightly, you're in a position where that business model or that kind of way of growing is not the most prudent one at the time. If you were going out and pitching a startup now, that as we were just saying, you probably have a slightly different proposition at this point in time. I wanted to sort of, similarly to that, you've been in the Insurtech market for since inception, as we sort of. There's an argument about it's been going on for about 30 odd years, but let's let the modern version of Insurtech and what it is. The flavor of entrepreneur, I've noticed that the profile has changed. I wonder if you would agree with that, and how you think that has changed.
Well, I think that the, Insurtech 0.0, right, or 0.1, which kind of mostly predates me, I would say. You had insurance people, right, trying to sort of move the industry forward through technology. And, bits and pieces of success there, but, back to the earlier part of our conversation, maybe there wasn't as much pent up sort of demand and value from the root technologies and so on. Insurtech, 1.0, 6-7 years ago, I think really saw the influx of more of your, classic Stanford engineer, right, type, the software-led entrepreneur who maybe didn't have any insurance experience to speak of at all, right? But they sort of took that top-down recognition of, gee, a bunch of user experience is lousy. There's lots of market cap here. They haven't used the technologies anywhere near the same degree that other industries like banking have. There's an opportunity. Let me go figure this out. And I know software and how to sort of leverage software to make businesses more effective, more efficient. And you saw that type of entrepreneur really come in here, which, by the way, is the type of entrepreneur that VCs particularly like to support, right?
Yes.
VCs, if given a choice, the typical VC between investing someone who's great at software and steeped in the culture of entrepreneurism, versus one who is, deep in industry expertise and deep in the culture of the industry, but doesn't necessarily have the software piece, the VC community is almost always going to be in favor of that first one. I think with this Insurtech 2.0 wave, again, marked by things like more niche opportunities being pursued, a little bit more balance around growth versus unit economics. I actually think that you're seeing there a little bit more of the pendulum swinging back to these are often people who, if they're not deep in insurance, they at least have some exposure to insurance as well as exposure to technology. And that's part of what gives them the insight. Oh, here's a niche that needs fixing, and I know what it needs because I've got some insurance background, and I know how to do that because I got some technology background, and boom, they go after that. So I think we're now in that third wave, the Insurtech 2.0 of the entrepreneurs being a little bit more balanced, and from a building a business slightly more pragmatic, a little less sort of pie in the sky, we can take on everything, at least initially, and a little bit more like, okay, how am I going to build a business that's not beholden to raising $200 million of capital in its first 2 years?
Yeah, no, exactly, and we're seeing more. Because the problem with Insurtech as well is that we're both having this conversation and lumping it all together, but we've got one end of the spectrum, we've got full stack digital insurers through digital MGAs, through to quite broad platform offerings, all the way to really discrete specific technology solutions, and they all fit within that bucket. But I think the sort of broader, bigger versions of all of these are the ones that seem more at threat at the present time, and what I'm seeing more of is these discrete or specific or niche offerings, and those are the ones that I'm personally quite excited about. And although I'm not an investor, that we work with earlier stage businesses, so I'm kind of, we're investing our business time in those businesses, and so it's always kind of about trying to spot the trends, and that's just that is the trend of what we're seeing, and I think those businesses that are coming out now absolutely echo what you've seen. It was the engineering led, product led individuals, and now we're seeing founder teams that are much more working with the industry. For example, they're not going for a different distribution model, they're working through broker distribution models because people have seen, well, actually it's a really cost effective way of getting to market, unless they're going embedded, and then that's a whole there's an hour on that we could do. So yeah, definitely the profile's changed, and I think that's interesting. What do you zero in on when you're making an investment decision? I know there's so much there, it's got to fit thesis, it's there's the CAC or various other elements, but what really is the thing that you zero in on personally when you're making an investment decision?
Well, look, I'll start with the obvious one that every VC says, and it's true, right? The people, the management team, right? The founders. I'd always rather invest in an A quality founder with a B initial idea than a B founder chasing down an A level initial idea. Now, I will also say, I think we need to be really careful about what makes someone an A versus a B as a founder. I think we need to be careful not to be knee-jerk about it. I think we need to be careful that it doesn't have to be a Stanford engineer, right? I live 2,500 miles from Stanford, right? So I'm in like the real world here, which and I think that so I think just being mindful of that and not being cookie cutter about it. You have to believe this person is great, but that doesn't mean you have to believe that they look like every other Stanford engineer, right? In order to be great. I think that the opportunity, right, has to be something where, number one, it's got to be large enough, right? People always talk about TAM, total addressable market. That's true. It's got to be large enough where you can see a way. Like I'll get the occasional pitch deck where they show, and in 5 years we have $25 million of revenue, right? And actually pretty capital efficient, getting from here to there, and it's great. It's a lovely business. But I will tell them in a very direct way that is absolutely not a venture backable business, right? Because venture is driven by the power law, right? I don't care. I care, but I don't really care. My results are not driven by if I lose money on 5 out of 10 companies that I invest in. I'd rather make money on them, sure, but my results are really not driven by. My results are driven by the top 1 or 2, or if I'm really good, 3 investments out of 10, and how big are those? Right? If my best ones are like 3-4x, well, then I'm not a very good VC. I'm not having a very good fund. Right?
Yeah.
You need to have, and so it's really about, is there a plausible path here where this gets a 20x, 30x, 40x, right? If the entrepreneur is as good as we think they are, if the market is actually as ripe as we think, and if a couple things go their way, like that's what you're betting on. And then I think that you've got to also know why you're a fit for that particular startup, right? I really, there are some generalist VCs, and they have their value prop around why sort of they should exist. I think a VC has to always ask, why do we deserve to exist? Like, what do we bring to the table that the other couple thousand VCs wandering around don't? You got to be distinctive about that, and you've got to have you've got to be disciplined around only investing in those companies, those startups that really do line up with what you're good at as an investor, what where you'll be able to actually help the startup. And there's lots of different ways to help a startup, but you got to be very crisp and clear about, to yourself and to them, what that's about. So part of what we look for is it's actually a fit with where we can help. For Semper Virens now, that's very much about understanding the employer decision-making process. It's about connecting them into employer channels, or in healthcare tech, which is sort of overlaps a lot with employers in the US, also understanding the payers and things like that. But like, you got to have clarity about what you're bringing to the table and why it fits.
Yeah, I think the specialization of VCs is so clearly so important. I'm sort of, I'm always reflecting things back on your own industry because it's the industry you understand, right? It's the same for, sometimes we compete with fintech businesses, and I go, yeah, but Insurtech is 10% of fintech. So if you're only spending 10% of your time in it, you can't understand the nuances and you can't access the talent. And I would imagine it's the same. It's like reflecting that back and going, we can help you because we're zeroing in on this piece. We understand it culturally. We can connect you. What's changed about, before I jump to that, I really wanted to come back to the thing you said, because it is about the founders, but I thought it was really important what you said about being careful that we don't just invest in Stanford MBAs, etc. Because conversation we just did a group webinar, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had some great venture capital guys on there. and talking about the part to play that venture has, which is if we're investing in the cookie cutter version, then we're not doing a lot about DE&I. And I was wondering what, have you taken steps to address that? Is that something that you're conscious of? How do you kind of try and not fall into that trap of basically investing in the, white middle class Stanford MBA person? Like that's realistically what happens. Says the white middle class middle-aged guy.
Look, I think it is a real issue, and there's different aspects of trying to solve for it. So on the conference side, right? I'll start with that, right? Because we grappled with that, right? There were plenty of folks who would look like you and me, right? With about the same amount of hair on our heads, who were at about the same age range and so on, who would want to be on stage and don't want to discriminate against them, but also want to like have balance here. What does that look like? And so, the way I describe it in that context is we always wanted to make sure that the people who are on stage were looking like the future of what insurance is going to be, not where it's been, right?
Sure.
And so, thinking about where does that look like? What does it mean to be? My corollary of that is good news. You can actually now be in the insurance industry and not have to play golf. Like, okay, that's great. Because actually some people don't like to play golf, and I mean, they'll swallow it if they have to, but like, okay, that actually is a really subtle form of diversity, right? Because tying your advancement in a industry to sort of an affiliation with a particular sport, like it sounds crazy when I say that, but I think there's a kernel of truth to that, right? And especially if that's a sport that is tied to country clubs and things like that, like, okay, maybe there actually is, right? It sort of starts to be as bad as having, the business deal done in the men's room. Like it creates a skew that we don't need. That's not actually a productive skewing in how we operate. On the venture side, I think it is challenging. I in a sense, I alluded to, I actually live in the real world, unlike many other VCs. So I live in Richmond, Virginia, very middle of the road. It's probably like the 50th largest city in the U.S. I think that actually, at a personal level, gives me a little bit more perspective, including on demographic issues. Right, Richmond has very, very different demographics than San Francisco, dramatically. And like, I'm not going to assert that there's an easy answer or that I've got a proper solution for it. I think that you're in your question, you talked about like how do you make a conscious choice around that. I think that actually is the starting point, is being conscious about it. Right? And I'm not going to change my criteria of the most important thing is the capability of the founder. That's not negotiable. But let's make sure that when I'm assessing the capability of a founder, I'm not doing so in some sort of knee-jerk or cookie-cutter way, or that I'm having some sort of visceral reaction to mannerisms. Mannerisms are actually have cultural components to them, some demographics, some not. And let's make sure that if I'm reacting in some visceral way to particular mannerisms, I'm asking like, oh, well, is that actually a thing on me? Is that something I got to figure out? Oh, that doesn't make them a less capable entrepreneur, right? That's just my gut sort of overreacting to something. Okay, well, let's be mindful of that and make sure that we're not doing something counterproductive for me and for them.
No, I think, I mean, one of the things that came out of the conversation the other day was as much as talking about it in itself was useful, the consciousness of it, because it happens. I think investing has so many parallels with hiring people. You're putting your time and money into people, you're making those decisions based on people, and familiarity has a huge impact on that. that person is like me, that's great, and that's from a hiring perspective, and just being kind of conscious of it. But I think the mannerisms thing is very important. What you said, the golf thing, it's hugely important and really made me laugh. I'm from a very working class family. I'd never seen a golf club till I was about 25, and then everyone played golf. I still play golf to this day because if I want to spend any time with my friends who all play golf, if I don't play golf, I won't see them. But twice a year we go on holiday, and I torture myself around a golf club. That's a bit different. But at work, I found it very difficult because I didn't want to play golf. Wasn't interested in it, and so many deals were done. And I know on the venture side, some of the complaints we've received when talking to kind of women particularly in the industry are, I don't want to go drinking with a bunch of men I don't know in the evening to get venture. So little things like changing the time, the place, the location, for example, not zeroing in on every, the equivalent would be in the UK that there's always a complaint that all the money comes out of London, and New York in the US or San Francisco in the US, and saying, well, actually there's VCs spread around. I think these little things are important, and they spread the kind of risk of us diving in. But I think just talking about it and being aware and what we can do is so important. You and I had a conversation.
I actually
sorry,
like,
no, please.
I actually do, I'm sorry. I actually do like that the insurance industry is much more geographically dispersed, whether in the US or globally, than many other industries. I think about banking, right?
Sure.
Wall Street is a metaphor in the same way that Silicon Valley is a metaphor, right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, like, banking is very concentrated in New York in particular, right?
Sure.
Insurance is, and globally, banking is concentrated in probably 5 cities around the world. Insurance, I think, is actually much more dispersed. And I actually think you see that in the profile of a lot of the entrepreneurs, right? Especially those who come with some insurance background. You actually see them coming out of the US Midwest, right? Much higher proportion than you might see in other industries that are venture backed. So I really like that too.
Yeah, and that's what I think is one of the benefits of the US has got this kind of, the scale and size of it. One of the benefits there is spreading that across, because one of the complaints I often hear in the UK is that we've seen this reduction in the sort of regional insurance market in terms of offices, it's simply just physical spaces, because so many good insurance professionals came from, these regional offices where they would train in one of the big, one of the large carriers, and then they would earn their stripes there. That was my story. I started in a regional office of an insurance carrier, and then I came to London. The diminishes that has actually diminished the level of talent and the accessibility of the insurance industry, and that's to its detriment. So yeah, I do think the US has that huge advantage, and one of the things about insurance and Insurtech is that we shouldn't be so geographically focused, especially not now. But don't want to get into politics, but our government's not helping us support that because we've got a terrible transport network. It's a very sore day for that. We've got strikes coming up, and we've got record oil prices, which is not helping. So moving swiftly on. So you and I had a great conversation about this, and I thought you had some great, interesting things to say about this. We sort of we had a conversation before about legacy culture versus legacy technology, and like which one is actually standing in the way of change. And I suppose it could be both, I'm sure. But but
I mean, look, both are obstacles, but they are not, in my mind, the same magnitude of obstacle, actually, right? It's easier to point to the legacy technology, right? The systems from the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, oh my, and how, in order to create APIs, accessing them, it's a massive endeavor. Or, if you want to launch something with no code, right? What does that mean in terms of the existing technology stack that you've got? Yes, those are real and legitimate questions to be addressed and tackled, but they are fundamentally addressable and tackleable. It is the legacy culture which stands in the way far more often, I believe. Right? It is, well, that's the way we've done it. So, and it's, if it ain't broke, we don't need to fix it. We don't need to modernize. The customer experience, we're not terribly proud of the customer experience, but it's okay. We're still getting the customers that we want from the brokers, and do we really need that satellite data to let us underwrite better? I mean, it's been fine, and gee, actually my actuarial science training doesn't teach me how to use satellite data so much. I mean, the legacy culture is the much bigger obstacle, because if you choose to solve for legacy technology, right, there's a bunch of rational choices you can make. And by the way, like, part of it is playing defense and part of it's actually playing offense. And again, you can make choices around that. And I think the challenge with legacy culture is that you don't even necessarily get to the point of having the rational assessment of where there's opportunity to play offense, to play defense, to create efficiencies, to get more speed, whatever. It's very easy, particularly in larger, established, successful businesses, to be able to just stick with, well, that's not something we've done before. We don't have a burning need, a burning problem to fix it. Let's just keep going, for a few more years. And we had the CEO of Chubb as keynote speaker at ITC last year. And I'm going to paraphrase, but I really love something that he said about Chubb. And I actually think that it's true, in addition to being what he said. So he said that in years past, Chubb had an underwriting culture that served it very well. But today, he said, it has an underwriting and engineering culture. And I love that, right? Because first of all, clearly, he's been mindful about what culture, right, does he want, right? And because every choice there has trade-offs. And he's saying, look, I need engineering to be on equal footing with underwriting, right? And that's a cultural change. That's not a tech stack change. I've actually seen evidence that it's true. Like, and oh, by the way, like, not the least of which is he called it engineering and not IT. Right? I like to make the joke that if you call it IT, you've already lost. You've already missed the point. You can debate, is it engineering? Is it developers? Is it coders? That's fine. If it's IT, no, IT they're the folks who get my computer set up or make sure my phone works, right? I'm sure I'm going to annoy a lot of people with what I just said there. But like, there is a mindset difference that is sort of evidenced by the language that someone chooses to describe that kind of work. And so I think that the part of the advantage that the startups have, right, is they come into it, right? True, they don't have legacy technology to work through and to refactor and so on. But more important, they don't have legacy culture, right, to try to drive a 2-year change management program around how we're going to do things. They go in actually with, let's try to, we want to be the agent of change in the first place. And you can get yourself into trouble if you disrespect conventional wisdom, which is why a lot of the better Insurtechs do bring in people from the industry. But you have a cultural piece that needs to be around, okay, let's explore what's possible. Let's see what the benefits of this new technology might be. Oh, we can't find one? Fine. We don't have to use it just for technology's sake. Oh, that satellite data feed can actually help us, underwrite faster or cheaper or smarter. Okay, let's look into that, actually doing that. Great. The culture piece, right, is such a, and as Chubb demonstrates, I think you can actually embrace a culture of change and a culture of tech-driven change, right? Whether you're a massive company or a startup, but it does require, like, you got to be choiceful about it.
It also requires a management of timeframes. I think that's the easier thing about technology as well, to say, right, we're going to evolve and we're going to move over to a new technology stack. It's going to take 2 years. This is the plan. This is how we're going to do it. Oh, we both know it's going to take 4 years and it costs 10 times as much. But there is a timeline and they're working towards something. But we very rarely see that on a culture perspective, because we go, oh, we're going to change culture. Culture requires you to probably shed a few people, hire new people, build new departments. You're absolutely right. Technology, we talk about that all the time. Technology teams within large carriers are generally set up to maintain this old technology stack. That is not the same as an innovative engineering team that is looking for the future. And I think if we see the growth of innovation teams within side carriers, it used to be, oh, let's hire some really smart person, stick them in a room. They had no budget, no power. We're already seeing the evolution of those teams now have top-down input, they have budgets, and that's changing. I'm really conscious of the time, so I want to sort of bring to a last question. There's a bit more of a fun question. I hope. First ITC for me this year in Vegas. I'm sure there'll be many people because it's going to be bigger than it's ever done. What should one prepare for with ITC? What are your
my advice? Yeah. A couple of things. Make sure you get lots of rest in advance because you are going to be working hard, right? This is not a boondoggle. You're going to be exhausted at the end. So make sure you catch up on sleep in advance. I'd also say, like, get yourself into the extrovert mindset. Like, be prepared to, walk. There's a difference walking around looking grumpy and walking around with a smile on your face. Like, people will come up to you if you look inviting, right? If you go out of your way, people will come up to you. You go look for someone else who's smiling and just sort of standing at the coffee and go introduce yourself. ITC, what's special about ITC is people's mindset is very different from the other 362 days of the year in their work life, right? At ITC, people are open to new possibilities, new introductions. They're genuinely curious about, oh, what do you do? Right? Oh, what do you do? Oh, how did that work for you? They're open to those conversations. So just go in with that mindset.
Yeah, perfect, brilliant. Just good rules for life, I would say. Walk around with a smile on your face is always going to be a bit more engaging. But Caribou, I've loved this. I loved our prior conversation. I'm really glad we got to do this. I think you bring a really kind of like fresh, just different take on what investing is and what the community of insurance is. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thanks. It's been a terrific hour with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.